Hello and welcome on our presentation about human locomotor system, and it will be presented by Antoni Bańkowski and Piotr Kryłowicz. Okay, so let's start. Firstly, a quick introduction. As we all know, the human locomotor system is really complex. So we have divided it into three topics. At first, we are going to talk about muscles, and then Antoni will talk to you about bones, and at the end, you will get something to know about joints. All right, so I think we should start. And let's start with a quick introduction on what exactly is a muscular system. It is a network of over 650 muscles that covers your body. Mm, and those muscles, I would say, they are mostly responsible. Thanks to them, you can, for example, blink, smile, but also run, jump, and those and muscles are really important, especially when talking about organs, as they are, for example, responsible for heart's dependable thumb, or to say more, maybe in your stomach they keep the acid inside. And to show you how complex this muscular system actually is, in order to take one step, 200 muscles get into work, and that's actually in your unison. So, in order to lift your foot, then you have to propel it forward, and then to set it down. This all just simple procedure takes 200 muscles to work. All right, next slide. And now I'm going to talk about muscle variety. As you may have seen from a previous slide, we have 650 muscles, and from those 650, the longest one is this sartorius muscle, and it is 50 centimeter long. Mm, it comes from your hips up to your knees, up to your bottom of your knees. Um, it acts to, as you can see, it sometimes acts to flex the hip externally. So thanks to it, you can rotate it. Okay. And another example about how various muscles we have. Some of the shortest muscles that we have are are in our head, but they play crucial role as they are, for example, responsible for our mimics. And as I said, then I but I'm going also to repeat myself. Um, uh, they're responsible, like for example, for our smile and for most of our mimics. Let's move on to what types of muscles do we actually have? Well, we can separate them into three types of muscle tissue. First one is cardiac muscle, and it's involuntary and unicellular. It mostly it is in our heart mostly, and as it was mentioned before, it is responsible for heartbeat. Mm, Also, it is I think it's important that we should focus on that some muscles are involuntary and some of them are unicellular. Then we have smooth muscles, and it's like they are in our organs. So, for example, in our stomach, and they are also involuntary and unicellular. And the third group, I find this group the most interesting one and important, is skeletal muscle. It is voluntary, so thanks to it we can move our muscles, and it's cellular. So it has builds cellular structure. As you can see on the right hand side, it has mitochondria and nucleus and all those characteristics that we have that we were learning in previous semester. And why is that? Why it has, like you can see, it has one, two, three, or even more mitochondria? Well, it has multiple mitochondria because of big energy needs that those type of muscles need. Skeletal muscles are need the most amount of energy, and it's really important to remember. Okay, so also you can see the structure of those muscles on the right. Okay, so now moving to the own structure of a muscle, and in this slide, I'm going to focusing on the skeletal muscle. So I think we should start from the hierarchy of the muscle tissue, and the biggest fiber, the biggest tissue that surrounds the skeletal muscle is epimysium. Mm, well, it plays a crucial role as it protects our muscle from friction against other muscles. As we know, muscles are um, tightly one into another, and thanks to this small fiber, we don't have any friction between muscles. And we should remember that muscles are protein, so it will be a lot of friction there. Then we have fascial, and it mostly groups up together, um, as you can see here on the right, a group of muscle fibers, and its function is really simple. It is a connective tissue. And finally, we have fiber. It contains those muscle cells that I have mentioned before, and function. It's a cylindric build. It has cylindric build, and most importantly, it exerts the motion of the muscle and work of the muscle itself. Also, if you are going to look on this picture on the right, you will see the tendon. Tendon is really important because it bands together muscle and bone itself. Okay, and it's the function of the tendon that it connects the muscle, so the muscle to a skeleton. All right, moving on to the next slide. So as it was discussed, so how do our muscle works? Well, there are many ways how they work, but the most common one is muscle contraction, and it's mostly made on antagonistic muscles. So those muscles work on opposite principle. And I think the easiest example and the easiest one to visualize it is biceps and triceps. So let's focus at first on the picture on the left. So as we can see, when the biceps contracts, it also bends the forearm, but thus the triceps is inactive and can relax. Then on the right hand side, we have the triceps that contracts, and then the biceps is inactive. So on this really simple uh, this simple idea, we can like most of our work is done in our muscles. So this is a really important rule to remember. Okay. So now some more additional topic, but I found it really interesting and important to know. So the question is, how do we build up our muscles? And at first, we should recognize two types of training that we can do. First one is aerobic activity, and those types of exercises include, as you can see on the picture, um, swimming, long, long time running, and biking. Also, and it is really important as you will see in a moment, it requires the presence of oxygen, and as you can see, later on it primarily works on type of first one it primarily works on type 1 muscle fibers. And in those type of activities, we do not build up our muscles like bodybuilders. They do the second type of activity, and it is known as anaerobic activity. It does not require the presence of oxygen, and in those type of activities, we exercise until we gas out. So it is really harsh training, but for a quite short period of time. And it's the exercises that are used are heavy weightlifting, also push-ups, like for example, sprints, so some dashes, short time running, and furthermore maybe hill climbing. And this type of activity will cause muscle soreness. Okay, to muscle soreness we will move on in a moment. Now we should probably focus on how our muscle grow. So before exercises, it's so during the exercises, our muscle receives some damage from those exercises, and it starts to repair itself. And this process is really important. Even the best bodybuilders will tell you that the time of rest, of repair, is crucial in muscle growth, as muscle can repair itself and also add more growth to itself. And also, a good diet is really helpful in building up your muscles. Mostly, this diet which has lots of proteins. So, for example, chicken, rice, and maybe say more, some bananas. All right. So now I'm going to talk about the muscle soreness that I have just mentioned. And yes, it occurs mostly after anaerobic activity. And um, we should right now focus on why and what's the cause of muscle soreness. So, as we've talked a bit about the aerobic activities such as swimming, in those type of exercises, there's a presence of always of oxygen, and then when when muscles burn glucose, they convert it into energy and pyruvate. But in anaerobic activity, muscles burn up glucose, there is no oxygen, and lactate is um, created. And this lactate continues to synthesize itself into lactic acid in muscles. It accumulates, and after time, this lactic acid in muscles is will be a direct cause of soreness. And as you can see on this picture on the right, lactate is taken from muscle and then transformed by blood into liver, when it's later on by the process of gluconeogenesis transform into glucose. So from this slide, remember, lactic acid is a cause of muscle soreness. All right. The next slide, muscle illnesses and injuries. And the first one, mostly I would say common, are bruises. And I think most of you have encountered bruises. So this is bleeding into the internal tissues. And as we can see on the right, on the photo, we have we 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 mentioned we should separate the bruises into four stages, and they mostly have these colors that they represent the let's say dying cells, like dying blood cells that are converted, by our organism. Then muscle cramps, and muscle cramps are actually really um, how from my experience they're really painful, and what causes them are in most cases are mineral depletion, nerve compression, and also inadequate blood supply. Mm, it's also important to point out what happens when you have muscle cramp. Well, basically your muscle can't relax, and as you can see on the right, it mostly happens with calf, but not always. And yeah, muscle can't relax when it should have. And last muscle illness at this slide is muscular dystrophy. Um, it's important to point out that this is mostly genetic illness, um, and it's really severe. Um, it mostly we can see that a child has this genetic illness something around 2 3 years when the child is 2 3 years old. And what happens? Well, basically your um, muscles die out, and they their amount um, changes and really rapidly. Well, it depends, but over time your muscles get smaller and smaller, as you can see what happens here with the biceps. And the last slide from me at this point is about the tendons and the tendons illnesses and their injuries. And those three examples of tendons illnesses and injuries are mostly they mostly happen um, to sport players, uh, or mostly during some sport exercises, but not always. Okay, so at first, torn ACL, and actually I should say what is ACL. So it's anterior cruciate ligament. So this is the one that you can see those ligament right in your knee. It's a really severe injury. It mostly happens to basketball and volleyball, but not always, but mostly to basketball and volleyball players. Um, what to say more? It mostly it's caused by an really awkward landing, and it's and the process of like well, firstly you need to have the operation, and then it takes from 3 up to 9 months or even a year for recovery. Then we have torn Achilles, and actually I should stop right here and to talk a bit about how strong tendon at Achilles it really is, because its strength is about from 50 to 100 newtons per millimeter. To put that inside, well, you can um, colloquially, I would say, take Achilles and hang a full car and take it into your, I would say, into and take it by something, and it will actually hold out. So this really shows how strong Achilles it really is. But even though people still get him torn, and it has there are many causes how you can torn your Achilles. Um, One of the causes may be, for example, genetics, but also your diet, or even really awkward landing. And it's the how you can recover from it is mostly by operation and then really slow recoverability. And finally, twisted and sprained ankle. And I would like you to know the difference between those two terms. So twisted ankle, as you can see in the picture here, happens only at grade 1 and 2. It in those cases in when those ligaments in our foot they do not get torn, and but they get a little bit of damage. And twisted ankle Maybe sometimes it has same, I would say, pain as it happens with sprained ankle. However, it heals faster, and in some cases it does not require medical treatment. While in sprained ankle, so in grade 3, uh, your ligaments get torn, and it's not pleasant because the pain can last up to um, months, I would say, and even in some cases there are operations to um, to fix them together.
The skeletal system of human body is made of 206 separate bones. The main functions of bones are support of the body, movement, and protection of fragile organs. Apart from that, they also produce blood cells, store minerals, and regulate endocrine. There are five different types of bones: long, short, flat, sesamoid, and irregular. Long bones are the main bones responsible for movement. They are longer than wider, and our height depends mainly on their length. Short bones are, for example, the wrists. Uh, Ribs, hips, and the skull are the flat bones. Sesamoid bones are the ones that protect the joints from strains, and irregular bones don't fit any pattern. For example, they can be found in the spine. There's a lot of bone diseases. Here are a few examples. The low bone density and osteoporosis is a health condition that weakens the bones. It makes them fragile and more likely to break. Brittle bone disease is another genetic disease. It makes bones break easily. Apart from that, there is also bone cancer. To prevent these diseases, you have to make sure your diet contains a lot of calcium. You also have to get a lot of vitamin D and exercise regularly.
All right, so now I'm going to talk to you about joints. And at first, we should talk about the role of joints. So they hold the skeleton together, and they support movement. They also enable us to have movement in various directions. And we can divide joints into two categories. Um, when dividing, we will consider their structure and their ability to move, so their movement. And the first one is fibrous joints. They offer no movement, and examples of such joints are skull, sutures, and our teeth. Then, okay, and one more thing, I will give you a Polish equivalent of fibrous, and those are stawy włókniste. Okay. Then up to cartilaginous. Oh my god, joint. They give us some movement, and examples of such joints are in our spine, as you can see on the right hand side the picture. And the third type of joint is synovial. Those ones are crucial because they give us ability of full movement. And examples of those joints are our knees, elbows, shoulders, or ankles. Um, and oh yeah, I forgot about Polish equivalents. So cartilaginous are stawy chrząstkowe, and synovial are stawy maziowe. And actually, synovial are I found them so interesting that I think we should also know different of different types of synovial joints. Okay, so yes, as I said, those joints are responsible for our movement, but as you can see on the right, we have different type. We have their different types, and we have starting from plain joint that was mentioned before, from saddle joint that is in our wrist, hinge joint in our knee, and so on. Maybe I should also point out about, say, about ball and socket joint that is only in our shoulder. And yes, we mostly recognize six of them, and each of them, as you can see, has its own unique function. And that will be all. Those were our sources, and we hope that you enjoyed, learned about uh, about human locomotor system, about our muscles, bones, and joints. And well, thank you for your attention.